We all remember recess growing up in school. Recess was a time of day where you could have all the conversations that you could not have in class. Recess is where the real conversations are had, and real conversations are what we're going to have. In each episode of the Recess Podcast, I'm going to have real conversations explaining students in school. I'm your host, David McGuire. It's recess time, y'all. What's up, everybody? Dave McGuire here, host of the Recess Podcast, back with another episode. Super excited about this episode. Those that listen to my show know that I am a huge fan of school boards. I always say that school board are some of the most important offices, and I'm joined today by a school board member here in Indianapolis. We're going to have a dynamic conversation. So I would like to welcome Dr. Gayle Cosby to the Recess Podcast. How you doing, Dr. Cosby?
I'm great. Thank you for having me today.
Absolutely. So this episode is titled Returning to Serve. So the backdrop is you previously served on the school board, took some time away, ran again, won the election. Congratulations again. And now you're back serving. So before we get into that, just who's Dr. Gayle Cosby, right? Just kind of paint a quick picture of who Dr. Gayle Cosby is for everybody.
And I'd say first and foremost, Indianapolis resident, East Sider, product of IPS K through 12. I'm a mother. I have a wide range of children in terms of age. I have a 29-year-old, a 14-year-old, and a 7-year-old. And I'm an advocate. I'm a professor. I wear a lot of hats. So I'm happy to jump into, many different lenses that I bring to my board service. But those are just a few of the ways that I engage with, my board service as a parent, a product of IPS, a professor of education, and a former IPS teacher.
Yeah. So let's go back a little bit. So let's think about the first go round on the board, right? Kind of reflect on that time. What was that experience like?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was a crazy time. So I ran for the board the first time in 2011. That was a pivotal year for politics in education in Indianapolis. And when I say that, I mean it was the first year that we saw really big amounts of money enter into the school board races. So I joined a board of people who had run in 2010 and maybe won their election with like $500 or $2,000 and some neighbors knocking on doors. And our experience in 2012 was just really vastly different. And it marked a new era, in terms of the educational landscape in Indianapolis. And I think, ever since then, so we're talking for the last 12 years since I was on the board the first time, we've seen some different influencers in the city. And a lot of that influence comes through political campaign, donations, strategically, not only with school board, but with other levels of governance, legislators and other folks in the city. And so it's been a very wild, eye-opening experience, which began 12 years ago. And as you mentioned, I took some time away. So, in that time away, I finished my PhD in urban education studies. And so this has, been the focus of my dissertation, and it's become a focal point of my work.
Yeah. So we share that scholarly interest in mind. So you talked about the first go round when you ran and the time away. What moment or moments during that time away where either you got the urge and said, okay, I'm going to run again, 2024 is the right time to run. Was there a specific moment or moments that led up that you said like, okay, I'm going to jump back into this?
Yeah. Well, I left technically, but I never really left. So I stayed engaged with politics, right? It's, it's a bug that gets you. And so, I saw other people running. I worked on some campaigns, and I think the thing that really got me reinvigorated though to run again was the Rebuilding Stronger plan that Superintendent Johnson introduced a couple of years ago. In that plan, I saw a great deal of potential to bring equity to the district, which was something that 12 years ago I was always lifting up in board meetings. I saw a lot of geographical inequity. And to put a name to it, what I saw was a lot of well-resourced schools along the Meridian Kessler corridor, namely CFI buildings. And they were highly successful for a lot of reasons that we can't extrapolate, right? Because we know that race and, socioeconomic status and all of those factors kind of conflate each other. However, it felt like there were a lot of students that needed access to those opportunities, and I was constantly lifting up the need to make that available in other areas. And so finally, I saw a structure that was designed to bring that type of equity to the district. And so I wanted to be a part of that because it was an issue that I felt very passionate and very strongly about on my first board tenure.
Yeah, that the Rebuilding Stronger plan. I know anybody that listens to this podcast that's in Indianapolis has definitely heard about it, and we've seen. Right, I know you're kind of in this transition, right? Because you don't get officially sworn in until January. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That's correct. So you will come in, and this is kind of in the first full year of implementation. You got a lot of great things happening at some schools, and transparently, right, some challenges, right, with any new plan that happens, everywhere. But when you think about, you served on some campaigns in your time away. You still stay connected. Obviously, you served before your product. You talked about the ever changing of the money that went into it, but you became a scholar, right? You finished your PhD, you finished your doctorate, you did that research. How does all of that, right? What type of, let me ask you, are you going to do you feel yourself being a different type of school board member now with all those different experiences than you were the first time? Or is this continuing the work that you started the first time you ran?
Man, both, and I guess I would say
Okay.
that I don't, I'm very authentic and I'm very honest and transparent. Those that, knew me during my first board tenure know that I wrote a blog, to keep my constituents informed and to also just kind of provide a space for running commentary of things that were happening. So I'm still that person, that part of me has not changed and it's not going anywhere. The core of who I am and my values are still strongly a part of my board service. I feel like the train is farther down the station with some of the ed reform pieces, right? And so I may not have to scream into the wind like I did my first tenure because I think there's a lot of more people out there that understand it, and so I don't know that I'll have to bring, that level of education back out. I will if necessary, but definitely want to keep my constituents informed. My constituency remains the heart of my decision-making process, and so making sure that I'm balanced and open and accessible is a part of my board service as well. I'd say the only difference is I got some more letters behind my name this time, and maybe, an increased understanding of some concepts. And so, the program that I attended is very critical in nature, which is good. And so I can now see more clearly concepts like gentrification and where is the intersection of what's happening in our city and how is that driving some of the decision making that's happening, not just with IPS, but at other levels of governance. And I'm just keeping my eye on the pulse of that. And so one of the things that I find concerning and that I want to dig into as a commissioner this time around is the demographic shifts we experience in terms of Marion, Center Township, Marion County residents, right? Because we see that there's some migration patterns happening, to put it nicely. And I would like to know, how does that impact IPS enrollment, if at all? My gnawing suspicion is that we see these migration patterns happening, but we know that not everybody is returning to IPS, right? And so to lean
Yeah.
into those conversations of the intersection of race, income inequality, public education, and now we're adding, we have obviously a robust charter school network, part of which is an innovation network with IPS, but we also see this very robust voucher program stuff happening. So, who
Hmm.
who benefits from what? You know what I'm saying? Is I
Yeah,
think an
absolutely.
important conversation.
Yeah. Have the needs of your constituents changed from 2012 to 2024, or the things that they're telling you? They're saying, Dr. Cosby, like, we still want X, Y, and Z. Are those things different? Are they the same? And what are those things that you would say your constituents told you, like, hey, these are the things that we want you to fight for?
Hmm. Well, I could tell you what I ran on and how that
Yeah.
must have resonated with, my voting populace, but it's a little premature. I haven't done any listening tours yet, so I don't want to speak,
Okay.
to anything other than what my platform was at this point, because I have yet to get out into the community and have
Hmm.
some listening, opportunities. So I ran on the idea that IPS needs to be mindful of right sizing itself. You know, in in particular, I think that IPS has an opportunity now more so than ever. We've had 20 years of charters. I think that we have a lot of resources to share in our innovation network program, that we can be very intentional and thoughtful about what schools are desired in the community, what schools have proven themselves with a good, solid track record, which ones have stood the test of time, which ones have a strong, family, school community, things of that nature, right? And so just to embrace a more holistic view of what makes a school successful is important to me. As an educator, I train future teachers, and I am not, you'll never hear me say that, standardized test scores are the most important measuring stick that we should be evaluating our schools by. And this is something that I really want, to spread this message, right? There's other important metrics that we can use to determine school success. And I think even as we look at the DOE, during COVID and post-COVID, we can see that some of those metrics have fallen off, or we're just not real clear on what's going to reemerge, right? So we need to get a solid handle on that. But the other thing we need to do is realize, and this is, not my words, but in the words of the state charter school, chief authority, he's quoted in newspaper articles as saying, look, we've reached a point of oversaturation in Center Township. So what does that mean? Well, that means that Center Township has too many schools, irrespective of type, but we've seen a lot of charter schools pop up in the IPS boundary, right? Well, if there's oversaturation, that means that in one neighborhood, there may be, 4 school choices and only 800 students to fill those 4 schools. So at best we could have, 200 in each school, right? Theoretically.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
oftentimes what I feel has happened is we've reached a point of like too much competition, right? I think, even as we apply the business model to schooling, which I'm not a huge fan of, we have to
Hmm.
realize, look, at some point we have provided too much competition, um, and it's thinning out our resources to such a point that it's detrimental to all, right? So if
Yeah.
there's 2 public school options and then 2 charter school options, and there's 4, those 4 school buildings and 800 kids, well, 200 kids in each building, even if we were equal about everything, may not be enough to fund the overhead of 4 school buildings. And so that's where I think we've gone beyond a point where it's healthy. I think it's now unhealthy competition. And one thing that I have not seen as a commissioner or just as an educator, I've never seen anybody come out with a study. Dr. McGuire, nobody's come out and said, this community needs a school because of this data, because this is how many school-age children are present. And, it just seems kind of willy-nilly that, oh, well, here's the building, we're going to throw a school up over here. Well, it's now like causing kind of a dissension amongst, all school types, where it's like everybody's, scrambling to resource themselves. So this is where we find ourselves 12 years down the road of where I began, the school choice and in this landscape of charter and traditional public schools in the city.
Yeah. Dr. Cosby, as a charter school leader, I've always said the same thing about the oversaturation. And then, you'll have folks, right, within a space will say, well, we want to give parents options in a variety of schools. And I said, I agree with that. Mm-hmm. But what I always question is this. When you have an oversaturation, you have 4 schools within one area, right? For parents, like you said, for 800 kids. Mm-hmm. On paper, the schools are different, but in operation, they pretty much run the same. And so that argument of like, well, they're different types of school, and I'm like, well, they're different types of school on paper, but when they actually operate, we all know that the schools write a certain model down, and that's not really the model, right? Because to your point, they really never ask the community about, is this the model they want? So when you become a school leader, you run a school, you have to operate your model within the people that you serve, right? Mm-hmm. Versus force feeding something. So what happens is you get 4 schools that are pretty much all the same in the same area. And that is difficult because now it's the wrong type of competition, and not the competition that's going to breed, greatness from everybody, but instead it's going to cause places to pull others down so they can build themselves up. And that's good for nobody. So I definitely agree with that. Like we have to have a real conversation about that. Mm-hmm. And pour more money into the schools that we have now versus opening new ones. And as a charter school leader, I've always said that.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think there's a person among us that would disagree with, quality over quantity, right? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. I want, and I think, over the years, we've seen some options weed themselves out. And that's been unfortunate for our community, because when we have a school that becomes available and then 2 years later it's no longer there, that hurts a group of kids and a group of parents who have to, find another option.
Group of teachers.
And teachers, right? It's churn that nobody is in favor of. And so I think, now having experienced and seeing what can work and kind of looking at a track record, we have some years behind us that we can look at success in a different way, in a longitudinal way, and build off what we know has been successful, right? Yeah. I'm just glad we have some parity. I want to add to your idea, though. I think in terms of school models, there's a gap that I see in educating our parents about how to choose a school for their child based on, pedagogy, based on learning style. Who I would love to see somebody step into that gap and create a tool, right? And so I'm giving somebody a free niche here or whatever, but I feel like
so let me ask you on that point, okay? Because my next question was, and it's more of an education, because I don't even know if this is possible. So also educate me as well as a school board member. As a school board member, are you allowed to bring forth a new initiative for the district? Let me ask that.
Sure.
Exactly. Okay. So here's my question for you, right? And maybe other folks that think about running for school board, to your point. What could that look like at a school district, right? That has multiple schools, that pretty much has open enrollment-ish, right? Where within the district, parents can go to any of these elementary schools. How could a district support in helping parents to identify, based on your students' learning style, proximity to where you live, to your style as a parent, these schools best fit you? Like, what would something look like for a school district to offer that to their family? So if you have 11 elementary schools, right, in a district, I'm just throwing out a number. Well, a family says, well, how do I decipher between these 11 elementary schools? Like, I don't mind transportation. I can get my kid to and from school. How do I pick the best one? Like, what could that look like for a district to do something like that? That's just a thought. To your point, I think that would be a great tool, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think that it could be spearheaded by the district or by one of our partners. I guess my mind goes to the fact that Enroll Indy is now kind of a little bit of a separate entity from IPS. It used to be a department of IPS. And so I think even the enrollment process is done through partnership now. So I'm sure we could figure that out, and that's something I could bring up for sure.
Yeah, as a researcher, I always tell myself I am a adopted researcher, right? I did a doctoral program at Marion. It's an EDD. A lot of my classmates did a capstone. I decided to take the dissertation route because I love the research. And so I'm really entrenched with a lot of like side projects on research. But to your point, I would love to just be a part of a think tank that says like, how do parents pick schools? Because the first we need to figure out that, like, is it just they go to the closest school, or do some parents have a process that we can kind of, pull from? And then what do we think would be the best? And then, like you said, workshop it, right? Pilot it, ask parents to say like, take this survey or whatever that would look like. I think that's a great idea. So 2 initiatives, and maybe you can't share yet because, maybe you got it close to the vest, so you want to do some listening tours. Do you have any initiatives that you would like to bring forth in your new term, or is your focus more about kind of the things you talked about previously and making sure that Rebuilding Stronger lives out its potential? Do you have things you want to add, or is your focus kind of just making sure Rebuilding Stronger is successful?
I think Rebuilding Stronger provides a nice framework and structure for several things to happen. I think that within the framework of Rebuilding Stronger, we can hopefully, bring some of that transportation spending down, right? Because we will, the theoretical piece of it is now we have 4 quadrants. And if in each of the 4 quadrants, we're offering the same, basic school types, then kids should be able to stay in their quadrant and not, travel quite as far as they used to. So I hope that comes to pass. But another thing, as I mentioned, is equity in terms of school type and opportunity. And I think, to our discussion, which is a little off the cuff, but in thinking about, thinking about what's out there in all of those quadrants and identifying, what's available to students, we could maybe, provides our families with a little bit more education around, will this be a good fit? And I would say a personal story to that would be my 14-year-old son. He started in a Montessori school, and I had to learn that even though in my educator mind Montessori sounds awesome, right? And I personally like a lot of Montessori components. I put my son in there who's very like kinesthetically oriented, right? He needs to move. He's that kid. He has a lot of energy. And also he needs direction. And so to put him in a Montessori classroom and say, you have a little bit more freedom than what is typical, right? He lost his mind. And I learned the hard way, this is not a good fit for him. And so, if I could help parents avoid a similar experience, I would, be glad to spearhead something like that. But I really am excited to be a part of a new strategic plan for IPS. The one we have in place is kind of sunsetting, and the new board that's coming in 2025 has an opportunity to develop new visions for the district moving forward. And I'm excited about that in the construct that I feel is more equitably designed. Does that make sense? And so it's all very encouraging.
I love that. Before I let you go, I want you to give a call to action. And I'm also speaking to myself as somebody, because I know I have listeners. Like, I do a lot of conversations about school boards or with school board members. I did a lot of that. And so since I have you, and I know there's going to be some folks that listen who want to run for a school board, but like me, is nervous or afraid or just whatever that is. So 2 things. 1, a call to action to those that are thinking about running for school board and why they should get involved. That's number 1. And then number 2, I would love for you to share, what is the legacy, right, you will want to leave when, when this first term, this new term is over, right? When your 4 years is up, at the end of it, when you have to run again, if you decide to, whatever that looks like, what legacy you want to leave. So first, a call to action to those of us to get involved. And then two, what is that legacy that Dr. Cosby wants to lead in this term?
Well, first, let me say great questions, and I appreciate you. First, I would say there's a number of ways you can get engaged. If you're thinking of running for school board or any office, the first thing you want to do is begin to involve yourself, right? And so I would say those that might be interested in IPS in particular, one thing that I'm interested in looking at is our committee structure and the ways that the public engages and has engaged. And so there are opportunities already for community members to come interact with us. And those are public facing. I think that CRE is one. So Commissioner Carey has been doing that for a while now, but looking for more members to attend that, and no limitations as far as I'm aware of. But there will probably be more opportunities that are of a similar nature, depending on what your interest is, right? So look for that. Get to meet people, get to know the issues. If you can't make it out, tomorrow night, every Thursday that there's an action session, which for the month of December, is tomorrow, the 19th at 6 p.m. Go on Google and search up the live stream. You can sit at home and watch and be informed of the governance issues that are on the docket every month, right? And so just beginning to get engaged, coming out, speaking, being an advocate for the issues that are of concern to you. Alternatively, go to a school and volunteer, get into the classroom if that's your passion. If you're an educator or you're studying to become one, we can use your volunteerism in a school near you. Come on. Good role models. The legacy that I would like to continue upon, and I think I began 12 years ago, is one of transparency and accessibility and good representation of my district. Someone who's in touch and open and honest. I'm not naturally a political maneuverer. Does that make sense? It doesn't come to me like that. I just really, I have a heart for it. And the heart in it is speaking truth to power. It's not easy, though, to be in spaces that aren't always the most comfortable or familiar, but to still say what needs to be said. And I think that if that's the only legacy I can leave, I'd be happy with that.
I love that. Dr. Cosby, thank you again. I've been really excited about this episode. I know when I reached out to you, I was so glad that you agreed to be on. I remember, the first time you were running, and when I saw that you were running again, I know I reached out, and so it's really excited to see what you do next. And congratulations again. And so again, this has been the Recess Podcast, episode 7, Returning to Serve, an education conversation with Dr. Gayle Cosby. And as I always say at the Recess Podcast, we create the platform, we control the conversation, we change the culture. We'll see you guys next episode. This has been the Recess Podcast, and I'm your host, David McGuire. If you want to interact more with the Recess Podcast, subscribe to our YouTube page at the Recess Podcast. Follow us on Twitter, the Recess Podcast 1, and subscribe and like wherever you get your podcasts. As I always say, create the platform, control the conversation, change the culture. See you next episode.